The emergency alarms had stopped screaming 3 hours ago, but Unipar could still hear them ringing inside her head. She lay on her back in the broken cockpit of her survey shuttle, staring up through the cracked glass at an alien sky. 2 suns hung above her, one bright yellow and one dim orange, painting the clouds in colors she had never seen before. She was alive. That was the first miracle. Why Una moved slowly, checking her body for injuries. Her left arm hurt badly, and when she looked down, she saw a deep cut running from her elbow to her wrist. Blood had soaked through her uniform sleeve and dried into a dark stain. Her head throbbed where it had hit the control panel, and she could feel a large bump forming above her right eye. But her legs worked. Her spine was intact. She could breathe without pain. She was alive. The shuttle was not so lucky. Una climbed out through a hole in the hull that had not existed when she took off from the colony ship that morning. The vessel lay scattered across the golden grassland like a broken toy. Pieces of metal and plastic and wire stretched out in every direction. The main engine had torn free during the crash and now sat burning quietly about 200 meters away, sending a column of black smoke into the alien sky. Una stood in the tall amber grass and tried to remember what had happened. The survey mission had been routine. Kepler 442b was supposed to be uninhabited. The colony ships were coming in 6 months, and her job was simple. Fly down, take readings, check the soil and air and water, then fly back up and file her report. She had done the same job on 11 other worlds. It was boring work, but safe work. Then something had hit her ship. She still did not know what. One moment she was cruising at 3,000 meters, watching the endless grasslands roll beneath her. The next moment, alarms were screaming, her controls were dead, and the ground was rushing up to meet her. She remembered pulling the emergency lever. She remembered the crash foam filling the cockpit. She remembered the terrible sound of metal tearing apart. After that, nothing until she woke up alone under an alien sky. Una spent the next several hours salvaging what she could from the wreckage. Her training took over, pushing away the fear and the pain and the loneliness. She found her emergency kit intact, thank the stars. Inside was a medkit, water purification tablets, protein paste for 2 weeks, a thermal blanket, a plasma torch that could serve as a weapon, and most importantly, an emergency beacon. The beacon was damaged. Of course, it was damaged. Una sat in the grass and stared at the cracked casing, fighting the urge to scream. The antenna was bent, and the power cell showed only 20% charge. She could try to repair it, but she needed tools, and most of her tools were somewhere in the burning wreckage of the engine section. She would figure it out tomorrow. Right now, she needed to treat her wounds, find shelter, and survive the night. Una cleaned the cut on her arm with antiseptic from the medkit, hissing at the sharp sting. She closed the wound with surgical glue and wrapped it in clean bandages. The bump on her head was ugly, but not dangerous. She swallowed 2 pain pills and drank half a liter of water. The larger of the 2 suns was setting now, and the temperature was dropping fast. Una found a section of the shuttle hull that was still mostly intact and dragged her supplies underneath it. It was not much of a shelter, but it would keep the wind off her and hide her from whatever creatures might be hunting in the darkness, because there would be creatures. There were always creatures. Every planet Una had ever surveyed had some form of life, and where there was life, there were predators. She kept her plasma torch close as she wrapped herself in the thermal blanket and tried to sleep. Sleep did not come easily. The second day was worse than the first. Una woke to find her arm swollen and hot, the first signs of infection setting in despite the antiseptic. She took antibiotics from her medkit and changed the bandages, but she knew she was in trouble. If the infection spread, if it got into her blood, she would die alone on this empty world, and no one would ever know what happened to her. She pushed those thoughts away and focused on survival. The morning was spent searching the wreckage more carefully. She found some tools, though not the ones she needed most. She found extra water containers, which was good. She found half a case of protein paste that had survived the crash, adding another week to her food supply. She found her personal tablet, cracked but functional, containing all her notes and research from the past 5 years. She did not find any way to repair the beacon. By afternoon, Yuna had established a small camp near the largest piece of wreckage. She had shelter, food, water, and basic medical supplies. She could survive here for 3 weeks, maybe 4 if she was careful. The colony ship would notice she was missing eventually. They would send someone to look for her. She just had to stay alive long enough to be found. It was during her 3rd supply run that she heard the sound. A cry, high and thin and full of pain, coming from somewhere to the east. Yuna froze, her hand moving to the plasma torch at her belt. She waited, listening. The cry came again, weaker this time, followed by a soft whimpering that made her heart ache. Every survival protocol she had ever learned told her to ignore it. Unknown planet, unknown creatures, unknown dangers. The smart thing to do was return to her camp and stay hidden. The safe thing to do was mind her own business and focus on her own survival. Yuna was not always smart. She was not always safe. But she was always human. She followed the sound. The ravine was about 1 kilometer from her camp, a deep cut in the grassland where ancient water had carved through the soft stone. Yuna climbed down carefully, her injured arm protesting every movement. The crying grew louder as she descended, leading her to a narrow space between 2 large boulders. There, trapped and bleeding, was the most beautiful creature she had ever seen. It was about the size of a large dog, but built like a cat. 6 legs, not 4, each ending in paws with retractable claws. Its fur was the color of polished bronze, catching the light with an almost metallic shine. A long tail lay limp in the dust behind it, and its ears were pressed flat against its skull in pain and fear. But it was the eyes that stopped Yuna's breath. They were golden bright and clear and full of intelligence. Not animal intelligence, something more. Something that looked at her and saw her, truly saw her, in a way no creature on Earth ever had. The young creature was trapped under a fallen boulder that had pinned its back leg. The leg was twisted badly, obviously broken, and blood matted the bronze fur around the wound. It must have been there for hours, maybe longer, crying out for help that never came. Until now. Yuna knelt slowly, keeping her movements gentle and non-threatening. The creature watched her with those golden eyes, not growling, not trying to bite, just watching, waiting, almost as if it understood that she was there to help. She worked for 4 hours. The boulder was heavy, and she had to use a metal rod from the wreckage as a lever to move it. The creature cried out when she finally freed its leg, but still, it did not try to hurt her. It lay there, trembling and exhausted, as Yuna cleaned the wound and splinted the broken bone with materials from her medkit. When she offered it protein paste, it ate from her hand. When night fell, the creature limped after her back to camp. It curled against her side for warmth, its rumbling purr vibrating through her chest. Yuna wrapped her arms around its soft fur and cried, finally letting out all the fear and loneliness she had been holding inside. She was not alone anymore. She named the creature Bomi, after her grandmother's old cat. And as she fell asleep with the alien cub warm against her heart, Yuna Park had no idea that her simple act of kindness had just changed the fate of 2 worlds. 3 days passed on the alien world, and Yuna Park discovered something wonderful. She was no longer afraid. Bomi healed faster than any creature Yuna had ever studied. By the 2nd morning, the cub was putting weight on her injured leg. By the 3rd morning, she was running through the tall amber grass, chasing insects that looked like dragonflies made of crystal. Her bronze fur gleamed in the double sunlight, and her golden eyes sparkled with joy and mischief. Yuna watched her and smiled. It was strange how quickly loneliness could turn into companionship. The cub followed her everywhere. When Yuna searched the wreckage for supplies, Bomi limped along beside her, sniffing at interesting pieces of metal and plastic. When Yuna sat down to work on the damaged beacon, Bomi curled up at her feet and watched with curious eyes. When Yuna ate her protein paste, Bomi sat next to her and waited patiently for her share dot at night. They slept together under the shelter of the broken hull. Bomi would press her warm body against Yuna's side, and that deep rumbling purr would fill the darkness until Yuna fell asleep. She had not slept so well in years. Not since her mother died. Not since she had left Earth behind and thrown herself into work to forget the grief dot here. On this empty world, with this strange alien creature, Yuna felt something she had forgotten existed. Peace dot she learned things about Bomi during those 3 days. The cub was smart, far smarter than any animal on Earth. She understood pointing. When Yuna pointed at something, Bomi would look at the thing, not at Yuna's finger. That was a sign of advanced intelligence, something only the smartest Earth animals could do. Bomi also communicated, not in words, but in sounds and gestures that clearly meant something. A high chirp meant she was happy. A low rumble meant she was content. A sharp bark meant danger or warning. She pressed her head against Yuna's hand when she wanted attention, and she licked Yuna's face when she wanted to show affection that she was not just an animal. She was a person, in her own way. A young person still learning about the world, but a person nonetheless. Yuna recorded everything in her tablet. This was exactly the kind of discovery that could change everything. If Kepler 442b was home to intelligent life, even pre-intelligent life, the colony plans would have to change. You could not just take a world that belonged to someone else. That was not how humanity did things anymore. Not after the mistakes of old Earth. On the morning of the 4th day, Yuna woke up alone. The space beside her was empty, still warm from Bomi's body, but the cub was gone. Yuna sat up quickly, looking around the camp, calling out in a voice that cracked with sudden fear. No response. No chirping. No rumbling purr. Just the whisper of wind through the amber grass and the distant singing of alien birds. Bomi was gone. Yuna told herself not to panic. Wild creatures returned to the wild. That was natural. That was normal. That was the way things were supposed to work. She had healed Bomi, and now Bomi had gone back to wherever she came from. It was a good thing. It meant the cub was healthy enough to survive on her own. But it did not feel like a good thing. It felt like losing her mother all over again. It felt like being abandoned, like being left alone, like being reminded that she had no one in the universe who truly cared if she lived or died. Yuna worked through the grief the way she always did. She threw herself into tasks, keeping her hands busy and her mind occupied. She tried again to repair the beacon. She organized her supplies. She expanded her shelter. She mapped the area around the crash site, looking for water sources and potential food dot. She did not let herself cry. Crying was weakness, and weakness was death dot by evening. She had almost convinced herself that she was fine. The suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. Yuna sat outside her shelter, eating protein paste and watching the colors change. Tomorrow she would try something new with the beacon. Tomorrow she would explore further. Tomorrow she would survive. Then she heard them. The sound started low, so low that at first Yuna thought it was thunder. A deep rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It grew louder, closer, and she realized it was not one sound but many. Dozens of voices, all rumbling together in a harmony that vibrated through her chest and made her bones shake. Yuna grabbed her plasma torch and pressed her back against the hull. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands trembled as she raised the weapon, pointing it at the darkening grassland. Whatever was coming, she would face it. She would fight. She would not die without a struggle. The tall grass began to move. Something was pushing through it, something big. No, not something. Many somethings. Yuna watched in horror as shapes emerged from the amber sea. One after another, they were Bomi. Or rather, they were what Bomi would become. The adults were massive, standing nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder. Their bronze fur was darker than the cubs, and their golden eyes glowed in the fading light like lanterns. 6 legs carried them with silent grace, muscles rippling beneath their metallic coats. Their claws were as long as Yuna's fingers, curved and sharp and deadly. 12 of them emerged from the grass. Then 15. Then 20. They formed a half circle around her camp, blocking any escape, trapping her against the wreckage. The rumbling continued. A sound that Yuna now understood was communication. They were talking to each other, deciding something, planning something. She was going to die. There was no question in her mind. These creatures were predators, apex predators, and she was nothing but meat. The plasma torch might kill one of them, maybe 2, but then the rest would tear her apart. She thought of her mother, waiting for her in whatever came after death. She thought of Bomi, and hoped the cub would remember her kindly. Then Bomi appeared. The cub pushed through the circle of adults, limping slightly on her healing leg, but moving with purpose. She ran to Yuna, chirping happily, pressing her head against Yuna's shaking hand. The rumbling of the pack changed, becoming softer, almost questioning. Bomi turned to face the adults and made a sound Yuna had never heard before. A series of barks and chirps and rumbles, complex and meaningful. She was talking to them. She was telling them something, and they were listening. The largest of the creatures stepped forward. She was old. Yuna could see that now. Silver streaked her muzzle and the fur around her eyes. Scars crossed her face and shoulders, marks of battles fought and won long ago. But her golden eyes were sharp and clear, full of a wisdom that made Yuna's breath catch in her throat. This was the leader. The matriarch. The queen of the pride. The old female approached slowly, her massive head lowered, her nostrils flaring. Yuna forced herself to stay still, to not run, to not show fear. The matriarch came close enough that Yuna could feel her hot breath, could smell the wildness of her fur, could see every detail of those ancient golden eyes. The matriarch sniffed her. Face, neck, hands, arms. She paused at the bandage on Yuna's wounded arm, inhaling deeply. Then she moved to Bomi, sniffing the cub's splintered leg, the healing wound, the traces of human medicine. For a long moment, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then the matriarch did something that Yuna would never forget. The gray old creature lowered herself to the ground, rolled onto her back, and exposed her throat. Yuna did not understand at first. She stood frozen, the plasma torch still raised, her heart still pounding. The Bomi chirped softly and pressed against her leg, and something in that sound made Yuna understand. This was trust. This was acceptance. This was a debt being acknowledged. She had saved one of their young, and they had come to honor that gift. Yuna lowered her weapon. She dropped to her knees in the amber grass. And as the stars began to appear in the alien sky, she wept with relief and wonder, and the first real hope she had felt since the crash. She was not alone anymore. She had never been alone. She just had not known it yet. The pride stayed. They did not leave when the matriarch rose to her feet. They did not fade back into the grassland. They settled around her camp, forming a protective circle, their rumbling voices creating a lullaby that filled the night. Yuna slept surrounded by monsters that were not monsters at all. They were family, and she was finally home. Yuna woke to warmth on all sides. Bomi was curled against her chest, purring softly in sleep. Two other creatures, younger adults about the size of lions, lay pressed against her back and legs. Their body heat had kept her warm through the night, warmer than her thermal blanket had ever managed. She opened her eyes to golden sunlight and the sight of the pride scattered around her camp. Some were sleeping. Others were grooming themselves or each other, their rough tongues running through bronze fur. A few of the younger ones were playing in the tall grass, pouncing on each other and rolling around like giant kittens. The matriarch was watching her. The old female sat about 10 meters away, her scarred face turned toward Yuna, her golden eyes calm and patient. She had been there all night, Yuna realized, standing guard, protecting her, making sure nothing came near the strange two-legged creature that had saved one of her cubs. Yuna sat up slowly, not wanting to startle anyone. The creatures around her stirred, yawning and stretching, but none of them seemed alarmed. They were used to her now. They had accepted her. She named the matriarch grandmother, because that was what she felt like. Wise and old and protective, the leader of a family that Yuna had somehow become part of. It was a human name for a creature that was definitely not human, but it felt right. Over the next several days, Yuna learned more about the pride than she had ever expected to learn about any alien species. She watched them constantly, recording everything in her tablet, trying to understand their society and their language and their way of life. They were not animals. That became clear very quickly. They were people, just as Yuna had suspected. Different from humans in almost every way, but people nonetheless. They had language. Real language, not just animal sounds. The chirps and barks and rumbles combined in patterns that repeated, that had meaning, that could be learned. Yuna started keeping a vocabulary list. A high chirp followed by a low rumble meant water. A series of short barks meant food. A long rolling purr meant safety or contentment. There were hundreds of combinations, maybe thousands, and she had only scratched the surface. They had tools. Simple ones, nothing like human technology, but tools all the same. She watched a young male use a sharp rock to dig roots from the ground. She watched a female use a stick to reach fruit from a high branch. She watched grandmother herself use a hollow reed to drink water from a narrow crack in the rocks. These were not random behaviors. These were learned skills, passed from generation to generation. They had medicine. When one of the young adults cut his paw on a sharp stone, his mother chewed certain leaves into a paste and applied it to the wound. When a cub ate something that made her sick, grandmother brought her specific roots that seemed to settle her stomach. They knew which plants healed and which plants harmed. They had knowledge. They had mourning. One morning, an old male did not wake up. The pride gathered around his body, making sounds that Yuna could only describe as weeping. They stayed with him all day, touching him gently, speaking to him in their rumbling language. When evening came, they dug a hole and buried him, covering the grave with flowers from the grassland. They were sad for days afterward, their usual playfulness replaced by quiet grief. They had love. That was the most important thing Yuna learned. They loved each other. Parents loved their cubs. Mates loved their partners. The whole pride loved grandmother, their ancient queen who had led them through dangers and hardships for longer than any of them could remember. Love was not a human invention. Love was universal. And they loved her. Yuna did not understand it at first. She thought they were just protecting her because of what she had done for Bomi. A debt to be repaid, nothing more. But as the days passed, she began to see that it was more than that. Much more. 3 members of the pride stayed with her at all times. They rotated in shifts like guards, but they were not just guarding her. They were keeping her company. When she walked to the stream to collect water, they walked beside her, bumping against her shoulders, rumbling happily. When she sat down to eat, they sat with her, sharing her food and offering their own. When she lay down to sleep, they curled around her, keeping her safe and warm. Grandmother visited her every evening. The old matriarch would bring gifts: fresh meat from the day's hunt, sweet fruits from the hills to the east, clean water carried in the cupped leaves of a broad plant. She would lay these offerings at Yuna's feet and then sit beside her, watching the sun set, saying nothing but somehow saying everything. One evening, Yuna tried to communicate back. She had been practicing the sounds, learning the patterns, trying to shape her human throat around alien words. She looked at grandmother and made the sound she thought meant thank you. A soft chirp followed by a rolling purr. Grandmother's golden eyes widened. Her ears perked forward. She made the sound back, exactly the same, and then added something else. Something that sounded like a question. Yuna tried again. She pointed to herself and made the sound she thought meant friend. Grandmother's tail began to wave slowly, a gesture Yuna had learned meant happiness or excitement. The old female leaned forward and touched her nose to Yuna's forehead, a greeting reserved for close family members. Then grandmother spoke. A long, complex series of sounds that Yuna could not fully understand. But some words were clear. Family, safe, home, Yuna cried. She could not help it. The tears rolled down her face and fell into the amber grass, and she made no move to stop them. Grandmother watched her with gentle eyes, not understanding why humans leaked water when they were happy, but accepting it as just another strange thing about this strange new creature. That night, Yuna made a decision. Even if she repaired the beacon, even if rescue came, she would not leave this world forever. She would come back. She would study these creatures, learn their language, understand their culture. She would make sure that when humanity came to Kepler 442b, they came as friends, not as conquerors. These were people. They deserved respect. They deserved protection. They deserved a voice in what happened to their world, and Yuna would give them that voice, even if it took the rest of her life. She worked harder on the beacon after that, not because she wanted to escape, but because she needed to tell others what she had found. The colony ships were coming in months. If she could not warn them, if she could not make them understand, everything could be lost. The humans might see the pride as animals, as threats, as pests to be eliminated. They might destroy something precious without ever knowing what it was. Yuna could not let that happen. On the 15th day, she finally got the beacon working. It was weak, barely strong enough to reach orbit, but it was working. She sent a message to the colony ship, telling them she was alive, telling them she had made contact with intelligent life, telling them to approach with caution and respect. Then she sat back and waited. The pride seemed to sense that something had changed. They gathered closer around her camp, their rumbling voices quieter than usual, their golden eyes watching the sky. Grandmother stood beside her, her great scarred head lifted toward the stars. They were waiting too, waiting to see what the future would bring, waiting to learn if the strange two-legged creature had been a blessing or a curse. Yuna reached out and placed her hand on grandmother's shoulder. The old female leaned into the touch, rumbling softly. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Family protected family. That was what humans did. That was what the pride did. And now, that was what they would do as one. The rescue shuttle appeared on the 19th day after the crash. Yuna heard it before she saw it. A distant roar that grew louder and louder, becoming a thunder that shook the ground beneath her feet. She looked up and saw a streak of fire cutting through the pale blue sky, a ship descending through the atmosphere, coming down fast and hard. Her heart jumped in her chest. They had received her message. They had come for her. She was going to survive. But even as hope filled her, fear followed close behind. She looked at the pride gathered around her camp, at grandmother standing tall and proud, at Bomi pressing against her leg with worried golden eyes. These creatures had saved her life. They had become her family. And now strangers were coming. Strangers with weapons and fear and the power to destroy everything. The shuttle landed about 200 meters from her camp, engines screaming as it touched down in the tall grass. Steam and dust billowed outward, flattening the amber stalks in a wide circle. The sound was deafening, and several of the younger creatures ran away in panic. But grandmother did not move. She stood her ground, watching the metal beast with calm, calculating eyes. Yuna ran toward the shuttle, waving her arms, trying to signal that she was there, that she was alive, that everything was okay. The side door opened and 3 figures emerged, wearing tactical armor and carrying pulse rifles. They moved in formation, scanning the area for threats, their faces hidden behind dark visors. The squad leader reached her first. He lifted his visor, revealing a hard face with sharp eyes and a military haircut. His name tag read Kim Taiho, and his rank insignia showed he was a senior sergeant. Taiho Kim looked at her with obvious relief. His voice was rough but kind. He said they had thought they lost her. He said command had been worried. He said they had searched for days before her beacon signal finally came through. Yuna tried to respond, tried to explain, but Taiho was not looking at her anymore. His eyes had moved past her, toward the camp, toward the pride. His face went pale, and his hand dropped to his sidearm. He asked what the hell those things were. Yuna turned to look. The pride had risen at the shuttle's approach. They formed their protective semicircle, the same formation they had used on that first terrifying night. Their rumbling growls rolled across the grassland like approaching thunder. Grandmother stood at the center, her scarred face calm but watchful, her golden eyes fixed on the armed humans. They were beautiful, and they were terrifying. And Yuna understood exactly how they must look to someone who did not know them. She stepped between Taiho and the pride. She told him to wait. She told him they were not hostile. She told him they had been protecting her. Taiho did not lower his weapon. Behind him, the other 2 soldiers had raised their rifles. The youngest was a woman named Subin Lee, her face visible through her lifted visor. She looked scared, her finger too close to the trigger, her eyes too wide. She said that with respect, those were predators. She said they needed to extract Yuna immediately. Yuna felt the situation slipping out of control. The pride was getting nervous, their growls growing louder, their claws extending into the soft earth. The soldiers were getting nervous too, their weapons swinging toward any movement. One wrong move, one loud noise, one moment of panic, and everything would collapse into violence. She made her voice as calm and firm as she could manage. She told them no. She told them to lower their weapons. The soldiers stared at her. They were not used to taking orders from civilians, especially civilians who had been stranded alone for weeks. Taiho started to argue, started to insist, started to explain that they had a duty to protect her, whether she wanted protection or not. Then grandmother moved. The old matriarch walked forward slowly, her massive body interposing itself between the pride and the guns. She did not growl. She did not show her teeth. She simply stood there, blocking the line of fire with her own flesh. Her golden eyes locked onto Taiho's face. It was a challenge and a sacrifice all at once. She was saying, "Shoot me if you must, but you will not harm my family." She was showing them what courage looked like, what love looked like, what a leader was willing to do for those she protected. Taiho went very still. Something in his face changed, softened, shifted. Yuna saw the moment when he stopped seeing a monster and started seeing a mother, a leader, a person. He holstered his weapon. He ordered everyone to stand down. Subin looked like she wanted to argue, but she lowered her rifle. The other soldier, a quiet man named Jiwan Kang, did the same. The tension did not disappear, but it faded enough for everyone to breathe. Taiho looked at Yuna. He said he thought she needed to explain exactly what had been happening here. Yuna explained. She talked for over an hour, standing in the amber grass between her two families. She told them about the crash, about finding Bomi, about healing the cub, and being found by the pride. She told them about grandmother and the throat-bearing and the gifts of food. She told them about the language she had been learning, the tools she had seen, the burial and the mourning and the love. She told them that these were not animals. These were people. Different people, strange people, people who did not look or act or think like humans. But people nonetheless. And they deserved to be treated as such. The soldiers listened. They asked questions. They looked at the pride with new eyes, seeing not predators, but neighbors. Jiwan crouched down when Bomi approached him, letting the cub sniff his gloved hand. Subin laughed nervously when one of the young adults tried to groom her hair. Grandmother watched everything with her ancient golden eyes. She did not understand the human words, but she understood the meaning. The danger was passing. The strangers were not enemies. Her strange two-legged daughter had spoken for them, and the strangers had listened. When evening came, Taiho made a decision. He said they would stay the night. He said he needed to see more, to document what Yuna had found, to make sure command understood what they were dealing with. He said this was above his pay grade, but he was not going to let anyone make a mistake that could not be undone. They made camp together. Humans and aliens, soldiers and scientists. It was awkward and strange and occasionally frightening. The pride did not fully trust the newcomers, and the newcomers did not fully trust the pride. But they shared the same fire. They shared the same sky. They shared the same hope that tomorrow would be better than today. Yuna sat between grandmother and Taiho, translating as best she could. She pointed at things and said the human words, then made the sounds that meant the same thing in the pride's language. Grandmother repeated them carefully, her deep voice shaping strange syllables. Taiho listened with wonder on his hard face. By midnight, grandmother knew how to say hello and thank you in Korean. Taiho knew how to say friend and family in the pride's language. It was not much, but it was a start. When Yuna finally fell asleep, she dreamed of two worlds touching each other, reaching across the stars to shake hands. She dreamed of humans and the pride walking together, learning together, building something new together. She dreamed of a future where kindness was stronger than fear, where understanding was more valuable than conquest. She woke to the sound of rumbling, purrs, and the smell of cooking breakfast. Grandmother was grooming Bomi nearby. Taiho was talking quietly with his soldiers, showing them the notes Yuna had made on her tablet. The twin suns were rising, painting the grassland in gold. The future was not certain. Nothing was ever certain. But for the first time since the crash, Yuna believed that everything might actually be okay. She stood up, stretched her aching muscles, and walked over to join her families. Both of them. 6 months had passed as the crash. Yuna Park stood at the edge of the research station, watching the twin suns rise over the amber grassland. The building behind her was new, made of local materials and designed to blend with the landscape. Solar panels covered the roof. Gardens surrounded the walls. A small team of scientists and diplomats lived inside, studying the world and its people. She was no longer Dr. Park, the stranded survivor. She was Director Park of the Kepler-4 42b First Contact Research Station. She had a staff of 12, a budget that made her head spin, and the ear of every major government on the colony ships. Her reports had changed everything. The colony plans had been rewritten from scratch. There would be no mass settlement, no terraforming, no extraction of resources. Kepler-4 142b was not empty. It had owners. and those owners had been granted provisional sentient status, the first non-human species in history to receive such recognition. Humanity had come to the stars, expecting to find worlds to take. Instead, they had found neighbors. And thanks to Yuna, they had decided to be good neighbors. The Pride lived about 5 kilometers from the station now. Not because they had moved, but because the station had been built near them. Yuna had insisted on that. She wanted to be close to continue her studies, to maintain the relationship she had built during those desperate weeks after the crash. Grandmother visited every few days. The old matriarch was slower now, her silver fur spreading, her joints stiff in the morning cold. But her golden eyes were still sharp, and her mind was still keen. She would sit with Yuna for hours, talking in their strange mixed language, teaching and learning and sharing. The translation software was getting better. It could now convert about 60% of the Pride's language into human words, and the percentage improved every week. They were learning that the Pride had history, stories passed down through generations about floods and famines and heroes of old. They were learning that the Pride had religion, a belief in spirits that lived in the wind and the water and the growing things. They were learning that the Pride had dreams, hopes for the future that were not so different from human hopes. They were learning that the universe was bigger and stranger, and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. Bomi was fully grown now. She stood almost as tall as grandmother, her bronze fur gleaming in the sunlight, her golden eyes wise beyond her years. The scar on her leg had faded to a thin line, barely visible beneath the fur. But she had not forgotten. None of them had forgotten. She came to the station every morning. She would find Yuna wherever she was, press her massive head against Yuna's chest, and rumble with contentment. Then she would follow Yuna around for the rest of the day, helping with tasks in her own way, keeping watch over the strange two-legged creature who had saved her life. The other scientists thought it was amazing. They wrote papers about the bond between human and alien, about the capacity for cross-species friendship, about what it meant for the future of interstellar relations. Yuna smiled and nodded and let them write what they wanted. She knew the truth was simpler. Bomi loved her. That was all. Love did not need papers or theories or explanations. Love just was. On the morning of her official installation as director, Yuna walked out to the edge of the grassland. She had paperwork to do, meetings to attend, decisions to make. But first, she needed this. She needed to remember why she was here, what she was fighting for, what mattered most. Grandmother emerged from the tall grass first. The old matriarch moved slowly, each step careful and deliberate, but she held her head high. Behind her came Bomi, walking at her side, supporting her grandmother with gentle touches. And behind them came the Pride. Yuna had watched the Pride grow over the past months. Cubs had been born. Young adults had found mates. Distant relatives had heard the stories and come to see the humans for themselves. The 43 members of the original Pride had become 68, and they all gathered now in the amber grass, forming a great circle around the woman who had changed their world. She walked into the circle, and they closed around her like a living wall. Bomi pressed against her left side. Grandmother settled slowly to the ground at her right. The others rumbled and chirped and purred, a symphony of sounds that the translator rendered as welcome and family and home. Yuna knelt in the grass and wrapped her arms around Bomi's neck. The great creature rumbled happily, licking Yuna's face with her rough tongue. Around them, the Pride watched with golden eyes, patient and calm, content to simply be together. Grandmother made a sound, a single soft note that Yuna had never heard before. The translator paused, processing, searching for meaning. Then it spoke in Yuna's earpiece. The word was daughter. Yuna turned to look at the old matriarch. Grandmother's golden eyes were warm, filled with something that needed no translation. Love, pride, gratitude. The same things Yuna felt every time. She looked at the creature who had accepted her when she had nothing, who had protected her when she was weak, who had given her a family when she was alone. She made the sound back. Mother. Grandmother's tail waved slowly, and a deep purr vibrated through her ancient body. They stayed like that for a long time. The human and the pride, sitting together in the amber grass as the twin suns climbed higher into the sky. No one spoke. No one needed to speak. They were family, and family understood each other without words. When Yuna finally rose to leave, Grandmother rose with her. The old matriarch touched her nose to Yuna's forehead one last time, that sacred gesture reserved for close family. Then she made another sound, one that Yuna knew well. Promise. It was not a question. It was a reminder. Grandmother was asking her to remember the vow she had made all those months ago, when she was scared and alone and trying to survive. The vow to protect the pride, to give them a voice, to make sure humanity treated them with respect. Yuna looked into those ancient golden eyes and nodded. She made the sound back, firm and clear. Promise. She walked back to the station with that word echoing in her heart. There was work to do. Endless work. Negotiations with the Colonial Council. Training programs for researchers. Language studies and cultural exchanges, and 1,000 small decisions that would shape the relationship between two species for generations to come. But she would do it. She would keep her promise. Because that was what humans did. That was what the pride did. That was what family did. Somewhere behind her, the pride returned to the grassland, their rumbling voices fading into the whisper of the wind. Bomi stayed, walking beside Yuna until they reached the station doors. Then she touched her head to Yuna's hand and bounded away, bronze fur flashing in the sunlight. Yuna watched her go and smiled. Humanity had reached for the stars with weapons and tools and plans for conquest. They had expected to find empty worlds, resources to take, territory to claim. Instead, they had found something they never expected. They had found family, and it had all started with one injured cub, one crashed shuttle, and one human who chose not to walk away. One small act of kindness that rippled outward across the stars, changing everything, proving that compassion was the greatest technology of all. The future was bright. The promise would be kept. And somewhere in the amber grassland, a young creature with bronze fur and golden eyes raised her head to the sky and sang a song of gratitude that her grandmother had taught her. A song about a strange creature who fell from the stars. A creature who healed instead of harmed. A creature who loved instead of feared. A creature called Human. And the wind carried the song across the grassland, across the mountains, across the seas, until it seemed like the whole world was singing. Singing of hope. Singing of friendship. Singing of a future where two peoples walk together under alien suns. Singing of family. The end.